Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So today's video is focusing on creating cards using the stamps from the Funky Fossil Designs Patchwork collection. But if you've got any stamps and papers in your stash, these techniques will work. So don't be put off that it is using a collection, because you can use what you have. And if you've got diamond shaped nesting dies in your collection, then you'll be able to replicate these cards using what you've got on hand. But a viewer specifically asked me to show a few of my ideas using these stamps from the collection, so that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. I am going to be using these gorgeous papers from the vintage Patchwork paper pad. This paper pad was 8x8, so it's a really good size. Off camera, I've die cut loads of diamond shapes using the die that came in the collection, but again, you could do this with a diamond shaped die that you've got in your stash. And I've cut these strips of pattern paper apart just so that I can create my own background and lay them how I want. But of course you don't have to do this. You could simply have cut out the pattern paper and glued it down. I'm using the Belly Arts glue to glue these strips onto a card front that I've cut out, and I'm working directly on a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card blank. So I've custom created this using the Creative Craft Products US sized cardstock, which is available from CraftStash here in the UK. It can be tricky to make US sized cards here because of our paper size difference, so I love that this is available from CraftStash, and it's a good way. It's 300 GSM and it's smooth white card, so it's perfect for all those ink blending techniques too. I'll link all the products that I'm using in the description box below as always, but yeah, use what you've got on hand. So now my background's ready. I'm just laying out these die cut diamond shapes all over the panel, and I'm just showing you all the different configurations you could have. So you could have a whole panel covered in the die cuts. You could lay them out differently to create different patterns or just diagonal stripes. There's lots of different ways that you could play around with this layout, but I do decide to go with just the 3, and I'm going to use the stamps on those diamond die cuts. Now remember, if you don't have diamond shaped stamps, it really doesn't matter. Any background stamp is going to work for this. These stamps obviously just fit the diamond shaped die in the set, but you could simply stamp a larger stamp over these diamond shapes and you'd still get the same effect. So I'm stamping with Wow Embossing Ink because I'm going to heat emboss these. And the metallic platinum regular embossing powder from Wow just matches the colour palette in the papers really well. It's obviously slightly more muted than a gold, but you get that lovely shine, and it just really went with the vintage theme. So I'll just quickly heat set those. I'm using my tweezers here just to hold them because obviously they're quite small and fiddly and I don't want to burn my fingers. I am heat setting from over the top just because of the size of the card I'm using. It's just a lot easier and quicker. And while I've got my heat tool out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment as well. I'm also going to stamp this in Wow Embossing Ink, and I'm going to heat emboss it with some white superfine embossing powder from Wow. I have used my anti-static powder bag on that black cardstock so that we don't get any stray bits sticking where we don't want it, and I will heat set that from underneath so I don't blow any of that white onto the black card. Then I'll just quickly trim it down using my mini Tim Holtz trimmer. And then I'm just going to have a little look at the rub-ons because I think I want to add some of those stitching details from the Ephemera Essential Rub Ons. I'm just going to add a little bit of foam tape to each of those diamond die cuts as well. And then before I stick those down, I am just going to trim out one of these stitching rub-ons and add that along the side of the card panel, just to kind of really help keep that theme of patchwork, sewn together, vintage vibe. And of course, if you don't have any rub-ons like this, then of course you could just use a black pen to just add some faux stitching details, or even a stamp if you've got a stamp in your collection that would add stitching. So I'm just going to add that little bit that was left over in the bottom right hand corner, but I needed to work out where it would be visible. And then I'm just going to remove the backing tape from the foam tape and stick those diamond shapes down onto my card front. If you're a bit worried about getting the placement right, then of course you could use a little bit of liquid glue on the back of the foam tape so that you've got a bit more chance to move them around. I ended up peeling that one up before the foam tape had stuck properly. But yeah, adding in a bit of liquid glue just allows you a bit of wiggle room. I then was a little bit undecided of where to put the sentiment, but I did decide to go and add it in the middle. I'm going to trim off those excess bits from the diamond shapes, add a little butterfly which was from the rub-ons in the kit, and all I've done is put the rub-on on some white cardstock, fussy cut it out to create my own ephemera, and then I'm going to add a foam square to the back of that and a bit of liquid glue just so that I can wiggle it around a little bit and get it in the right place. But there's our first card finished for today, and I think it came out really pretty, and it's a great way to use those stamps. For the second card today, I'm going to mix up some of the pattern paper with some of the stamped images. So again, I've die cut loads of these shapes off camera so that I can play around with the layout. Of course, you could do this with any pattern paper that you've got and a diamond shaped die in your collection. And it's a great way of using up paper scraps as well. So bear that one in mind. I'm just kind of showing you how I'm going to work out my layout here. It does take a moment just to play around and work out what's going to look best. But once I've decided I'm happy with the layout of where the patterned papers are going to be, I'm then going to stamp on the more plainer papers using this text stamp. And I'm stamping it in some VersaFine Clair Acorn Brown ink. So I did decide that I actually prefer the second generation stamping. And so for the rest of them, I'm going to do the second generation stamping. I've just brought in a scrap of paper to stamp the stamp off with and then get that second generation stamping in. It's just a much more subtle effect and I think it looks really, really pretty. So I'm just going to glue those diamonds down directly to my card front, and again I'm just using the Belly Arts glue. I really am enjoying using this glue. I know that there's so many different glues out there, but I love the bottle that it comes in. I love the fine tip applicator. I love the fact that it's refillable as well. And again, although it seems expensive at first, this is lasting me ages. I don't even think I'm halfway through the bottle yet, and I craft a lot. So yeah, I think it's a really good value for money, and it's a good strong glue. So once I've stuck all of those diamond shapes down, I'm going to trim off the excess because then I can use those smaller bits to fill in the gaps that we've got. So I'm just using my long bladed Tim Holtz scissors to do this, and it's always a lot easier if you trim from the reverse. So I'm then able just to use that extra little piece of the pink diamond shapes to just fill in those gaps. And then we've got that really lovely panel that we've created. And again, you could mix this up. You could use hexagon shaped dies to create a patchwork quilt effect, or even just square dies. Whatever you've got in your stash, you could use this idea with your pattern paper. I'm then just going to use one of the rub-ons to adhere that directly across the card panel. So this is just a strip of music notes. I think it looks really, really pretty. But again, you could use a strip of cardstock here instead if you don't have rub-ons. So I'm just, again, trimming off the excess from the end, and then I'm just using that lollipop stick to just add pressure to the rub-on to transfer it. Making sure that I add pressure where the raised cardstock meets the white cardstock underneath. You want to make sure that you've got really good contact there so that the rub-on transfers well. So once I've applied pressure and removed that backing tape, I'm then just going to add some faux stitching along the bottom of the rub-on as well, using this faux stitching from the Ephemera Essentials rub-ons. And it's just a really great way of adding an extra little bit of detail, and it's great to know that you can use rub-ons over the top of rub-ons as well to make them your own. So for the sentiment, again, I'm going to heat emboss this, and I'm just stamping it in some Wear Embossing ink on a white diamond shaped die cut. I'm then going to add the metallic platinum embossing powder again, just because I think the platinum really complements the paper as well. I'm just tapping off the excess there, making sure that I've got a good coverage because the sentiment is quite a fine detail. And then I'm going to heat set that from underneath again, using my tweezers to hold it steady. Once that's all heat set, I will add a piece of foam tape to the back of everything. I'm going to stick that card panel up on some foam tape to a A2 size card blank. And then the sentiment, I'm going to pop on a little bit of foam tape right there over the ephemera. I will just add a few little flat back pearls that I've got in my stash. I'll just use my reverse tweezers to help me get those off the backing tape and stick those on. And I think adding a few little gems just really finishes off a card and just can step it up a little bit. So there's the second card finished, and I think this looks really, really pretty. So for the third card, I'm going to just create this card using the stamps only. And this time I'm going to use the die just to cut out a diamond shaped section from Masking Magic. So this is just a masking paper. If you don't have Gina K's Masking Magic, you could just use some copy paper, a post-it note, anything just to create a mask. I love the Gina K Masking Magic paper because it's great if you want to be able to reuse a mask and it doesn't lift up. It's great for ink blending over and lots of different techniques. But yeah, I'm just using it today to create a mask right in the center of the card. I'm using my grid lines on my glass mat to help me to make sure it's nice and centered. Obviously you can't see my thought process there, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to add some stamping using, again, the VersaFine Clair Acorn ink, which is a lovely brown ink. This time I'll use the first generation of ink stamping, and I'm just going to stamp all around that mask layer with the text stamp. So I'm just going to basically create my own background paper using these stamps. Now, I put my magnet in the center to hold my cardstock nice and straight, and then realized it was just going to get in the way. So I've removed that, and I'm just being careful to make sure it's nice and lined up. I'm then going to clean off that stamp and come in with the floral stamp, and again I'm using the brown ink, and I'm just stamping that in all of those gaps around the card panel. And this is just going to create a really fun patchwork, custom made, homemade style paper, and it's a great way of using those stamps. So obviously for this technique you would need some diamond shaped stamps, but again you might have stamps that are other funny shapes in your collection, and you could definitely try a similar technique with those. I'm adding the faux stitching stamp all around those diamonds as well, just so that it looks like they're all stitched together, and I think this is a really fun effect. It's a great way of kind of creating a really rustic card style. Now you could individually colour each of those diamonds with the stencil that comes in the collection, but I'm just going to add some Tattered Rose Distress Oxide ink all over the whole panel, but avoiding that masked area in the middle. I just want to create some ink blending just to kind of tone down the white and give it that more vintage vibe. I tried this card off camera, and I added some vintage photo Distress Oxide and some Tattered Rose, but because the cardstock that I'm using is not very good with water, it just was a bit of a fail. So I decided instead of doing that again, I'd just use the Tattered Rose and then not add any ink splatters or anything else, and I think it turned out really nice in the end. I'm going to distress the edges of the cardstock with some scissors, again just to give it that vintage vibe, and I'm just using my scissors. I know you can get tools to do this, but I find it just as easy to use my scissors, so if you do try this, just be careful. I'm adding some vintage photo Distress Oxide around the edges just to soften those white lines, and then I'm going to use a piece of the pattern paper to stick directly onto the card blank, again just to add some more background interest. I've added some vintage photo around the edges of that too. I'm going to curl over some of the corners on the card panel, cut out a few little sections so it looks a little bit ripped and torn and weathered, and then that's just going to add some extra detail and interest to the card front as well. I did decide to add some of the rub-ons from the collection, so I'm going to add 3 of the butterflies and a couple of the gems, just again to add a bit more interest to the background. This is a completely optional step, you definitely could leave it as it was, but I just felt it needed a little bit more of a pop of colour. Even though the colour in the butterflies is subtle, it just does add that something extra. So again, I'm using the lollipop stick that comes in the set. If you lose your lollipop stick or it breaks for whatever reason, then you can definitely just use a bone folder for this. But you just want to apply pressure so that that transfers to the cardstock underneath. So once those transfers are down, I am going to add a few little of the gemstones just to where the diamonds like join. So these would almost be a bit like studs, or I don't know what you'd call them really in stitching, but just where the fabric meets. And again, it just adds a little bit of extra interest. I'm going to just stick that down, but first of all, I'm going to stamp my sentiment, and I'm going to use that one that says "You are a diamond." I'm going to stamp it in black ink so it's nice and bold, and then I'm just going to glue all these layers down to my card front. So again, I'm using the Belly Arts glue here. I am going to add some foam tape to the panel that we've created just for a little bit of extra dimension, but I am going to corner round all of the corners on the card front. And again, I'm really into doing this at the minute on my cards. I think it just adds something a little bit different, makes them look a little bit more unique, and yeah, I just really like the way that it looks. So I'm just adding some foam tape here, and then I'm going to stick that down nice and central on my card blank, and then that will be the 3rd card finished for today. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that it's given you some inspiration of ways that you can play with different shaped stamps and dies. If you did buy this collection when it came out, then I hope it's given you a little bit more inspiration of ways to use it. And if you don't have it, then definitely I hope it's given you some inspiration to use what you've got in your stash in a different way. As always, all the products that I've used will be linked in the description box below. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more from me, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.